you read the law, it says that Congress is the one that gets to decide the name, no one else. It's not the board. It's no other entity. It's Congress.
Mondays with Mike.
Mondays with Mike.
Okay, do you want to talk about the Performing Arts Center, formerly known as the Kennedy Center?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, so what appears to have happened is that Trump installed himself as chairman of the Kennedy Center board. Okay, here's a nice thing, actually. Trump got Congress to contribute $250 million toward renovation. I don't know if it would have been better if he had got private investors. I guess slightly better for the taxpayer, maybe, if there were no strings attached. But anyway, he's good at getting people to contribute money to things, so he got him to contribute $25 million toward the renovation of that center. He seems to have a specialty in buildings. Nice job, Trump. But then the board of the Kennedy Center, quote, voted unanimously, unquote, to change it to the Trump-Kennedy Center. Change the name. Representative Joseph Patrick Kennedy III said that the Kennedy Center
can no more be renamed.
Then can someone rename the Lincoln Memorial? So I wrote in the show notes here, coming soon, the Declaration of Indetrumpendence. So, my question is essentially me clutching my pearls. My question is essentially, is there any way that negative social feedback can be provided when such gaucheness is demonstrated? I'm just aghast at the transparent vanity. Doesn't this look tacky to others? What do you think of all this?
I think it's pretty annoying that it happened, that the name was slapped on in front of Kennedy's name. But I also don't think it's allowed. So if you read the law, it says that Congress is the one that gets to decide the name, no one else. It's not the board. It's no other entity. It's Congress. And the president doesn't have, it's co-equal branches of government. The president doesn't have the power to supersede Congress on something like this. And the board doesn't have the power to supersede Congress on this. So frankly, I think Congress should sue, reverse the name change and go back to what they chose as the name, the John F. Kennedy Center for National Culture Center, or Center for whatever it's called, the Center for Performing Arts. It's pretty straightforward. This is a government of the people, by the people, for the people. It's not one person dictating to us every facet of life. It would be very bizarre if every time this is very 1984-esque. It would be very bizarre if every day we woke up and we had to brush our teeth with Trump toothpaste, comb our hair with Trump hairbrushes, go about our lives wearing Trump clothing, right? The Trump shirt and the Trump pants and the Trump shoes and the Trump socks, right? That if every facet of our lives is just Trump, it would be, frankly, very odd and strange, because ultimately, the United States is the pursuit of happiness, freedom, and justice for all, those things. And it's not really freedom if we're being required at all times to see one person's name on everything for every facet of existence. And I'm reminded of that in the comments that were made after Rob Reiner died, that were just despicable, right? That the whole response was about Trump, and these people were just murdered. Their murder had nothing to do with Trump. Like, we're not living in a solipsism, right? It's not just me, everything is I. We don't all exist in Trump's reflection. Like, he's a temporary executive of the country, but he's only 1/3 of the government. We still have the Supreme Court and the Congress are the other parts that make up our federal government, that they operate of their own volition for a variety of things. So it's just very strange. I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like this in American history, in American life. Nothing quite to this degree. Even in his first term, it wasn't this bizarre, because we are in cuckoo land, like very bizarre, strange stuff, like demolishing part of the White House to build a 80,000 square foot ballroom. 80,000 square feet. Do you know how big 80,000 square feet is?
Bigger than my house. Yeah. I'm making a document right now. Project 2029.txt. Rename it the Kennedy Center. We can add more stuff. Yeah, it reminds me of the pictures of Mao everywhere. They just had pictures of Mao everywhere.
Yeah, or Stalin, or things like that, where you have to just constantly praise dear leader, that it's not, there's no escape from it. Actually, talking about something like China, where they have the social credit score, where your existence is dictated in some respects by how you act, whether you can get a job, whether you can ride public transportation, whether you can rent an apartment, whether you can shop in certain places. It's reminiscent of that if we get to a point of extreme surveillance where you're not praising Trump the sun god every few seconds so you can feed into his need for Trump praise all the time, right? So that the praise can trickle up and you can glow with the constant, I am Zeus on Mount Olympus. You must praise me for all that I am, right? Lest I strike you with the lightning bolts. That would be bizarre if we get to that point. Imagine if we get to a point where he actually gets away with this denaturalization effort of citizenry and also of getting rid of birthright citizenship. It may get to a point, and it's a scary thought, where if they have an extreme surveillance state, anybody that criticizes Trump in any degree, in any way, shape, or form, there is no longer free speech. You've criticized dear leader, here's the door. You get the boot. You get kicked out of the country to anywhere else. Parts unknown. Go somewhere else that isn't here. Like a glimmer of that. He's talking about Somalians being garbage people. What is that? He's painting a broad brush for a huge number of people and saying that simply by virtue of where they're from or their heritage, that they're all terrible people. That's ridiculous.
Such broad brush thinking has no place in this great country.
It's reminiscent of Germany, of saying whole categories of people are just bad people or deserve to have everything stripped away from them, kicked out of the country, not given jobs. People who were born in Germany, who speak German ancestors going back 500 years, 1,000 years, because they're part of a group that the government didn't like. That's the issue with the situation right now, is that they're putting in the infrastructure to label huge numbers of people as whatever, the people we don't like or the people they don't like, and then having actual consequences imposed on those people. The removal of citizenship, taking away their property, simply by virtue of the fact that they're in a part of the world, allegedly doing something the government doesn't like because they're in a part of the world that doesn't get to be covered by the umbrella of protection. They don't get those same protections that ostensibly every human being should be getting simply by virtue of being a human being. That's where we're at. That's what it looks like, at least from my somewhat trained political science eye, that they're putting in the infrastructure and the effort, the real effort, to take away citizenship from people. Governments normally shouldn't be able to do that, aren't supposed to be able to do that, of making somebody stateless, because the stateless are treated just abysmally in international politics. There's millions of people who are stateless. They have to live in refugee camps. They're hounded wherever they go if they can't get a passport or any kind of documents. They're essentially. Do you remember the movie The Terminal, where he had to live in an airport because he couldn't go anywhere else?
Yes. Yes, one of my favorite Tom Hanks movies.
Sure. That's where we're headed if the Supreme Court sides with the Trump administration on the executive order getting rid of birthright citizenship or the effort to denaturalize people. Because standards are extremely arbitrary for what they're deciding is worthy of denaturalization. Remember, this is a president who said it was sedition for members of Congress to just repeat verbatim the law. It's in the DoD war manual of the law of the UCMJ, the U.S. Code of Military Justice, says explicitly that illegal orders are not to be followed, that there's an obligation, an affirmative obligation, not to follow illegal orders that are given. Full stop. No ambiguity. No wiggle room. They list the bombing shipwreck survivors as a war crime, as something that shouldn't happen. And lo and behold, it happened. So clearly there's something strange going on with our current political environment. And maybe there will be a return to some kind of reason after the midterms, if hopefully the Democrats win enough to make a loud enough racket, right? That just bring everybody in front of Congress just constantly on subpoenas and be like, what are you doing? What are you doing? Why are you doing this? What are you doing? Stop what you're doing. What are you doing? We're going to cut all the money. They're going to play hardball at some point. They're going to just say, okay, you're acting like you have power, but we're just going to cut all the money, right? You're just going to sit there and twiddle your thumbs and stare at the wall or something. Watch paint dry. Like at some point, if they really don't comply with what Congress wants, at some point, Congress will take like real action. We'll see. But the closest thing we've seen to that is the Congress almost unanimously is calling for the release of the Epstein files. But we're seeing how that's playing out right now. I'm skeptical that the DOJ prosecutes itself for not complying with the law that it's supposed to comply with.
How can the DOJ put itself on trial? Yeah. If I may be permitted a brief creative aside, today my administration is announcing the Trump credit scores. Many credit scores are not good, disfavoring real Americans to favor the wealthy,
the elites,
and Trump haters. The Trump credit score will credit you for obedience to the law, and you can also get a boost by displaying a Trump 2028 yard sign. Get a score of 1776 or higher, and you get a discount on your income tax, priority boarding on some flights, and a free Trump coffee mug. We're making America great. Get a score of 1120 for November 20th, Joe Biden's birthday, our worst president, or lower, and you will be at risk of deportation. Designated one of the sleepy people. We don't need them. We don't need sleepy people in this great country of ours. It's like, I'm editing this tantrum that I'm throwing out. But look, in 2024, Alcatraz was a tourist destination. Now they're reopening it, and we got Alligator Alcatraz to boot. Now we get the Trump Kennedy Center, and what will 2026 bring? Will it bring the Trump credit score? You just don't know. You just don't know. But you're right. Ultimately, fortunately, Congress makes the laws, and the Federalist Papers, detailed how ambition must be made to counteract ambition. So if I'm a congressperson here, I'm thinking that this is an overstepping of power. It seems to be a trivial matter, but death of 1,000 cuts. It's on the Project 2029 list. And people know where they're going to be 3 years and 1 month from now.
Oh, the answer to what's going to happen is that there's a lawsuit from the historical preservation people. That's for the White House, but it's possible they could also do it for the Trump Kennedy Center. I don't know. But lawsuits are the way, I think, to hold this administration at least somewhat accountable, because they can do stuff. But at the end of the day, this is public land, right? If I remember correctly, the wording of the Supreme Court opinion wasn't that Trump's immune from prosecutions, only immune from official acts as president. And there's a real question if he's faithfully executing the laws of the country by acting unilaterally in circumstances where the law expressly states that he can't do that. So for things like the appropriation, essentially taking the Institute of Peace and now calling it the Donald Trump Institute of Peace, firing the whole board of the Kennedy Center, and then installing the people that are there now. The other stuff, demolishing the East Wing of the White House, like all of these are ostensibly supposed to be done in a certain way or process, and he's just not following that. And I'm hopeful that people sue, and then it gets to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court says, yeah, these aren't actually official acts, right? Because the official act has to be something that's faithfully executing the laws of the country, and this isn't that. This is something else. Yeah. One can hope that the Supreme Court will actually see reason at some point instead of just constantly just rubber stamping whatever he does. We'll see.
Yeah. Moral of the story, Congress shall make the laws.
Oh, the real test is this tariff decision that's going to come down, because they're going to bring the hammer down on the Trump tariff regime. If they say, no, it's all illegal, give the money back. That's going to be because he's using all that money as like a fund to just fund whatever. But anything that makes them look good or moving money around. It's what they did during the shutdown, I thought, is they used some of the tariff money to pay like the cops and a couple of the military and a bunch of other stuff. And it's okay. And also the issue with the tariffs is that the power to tax, I always thought, rested with Congress. Like the president can't just unilaterally impose taxes on people, which is be like, I'm just going to take your stuff.
Yeah.
Even with eminent domain, they have to give fair market value for your house or whatever when they use eminent domain to take property. So, no, I think that hopefully the Supreme Court says no, the tariffs aren't allowed in the way that they're done.
Yeah.
Have Congress pass a law. But we'll see.
On to whooping cough. So there are, according to NBC News, there have been 3,500 cases of whooping cough reported in Texas this year. That is a quadruple compared to 2024. One particular baby in this report was in the hospital for a month after getting the disease at 2 weeks old. You see this baby with the tubes hooked up. You hear the baby coughing. It does and should give you pause. When I didn't have, probably I'm just a cynical jerk on some level, but when I didn't have a kid, I was like, oh, yeah, there's a baby. Okay, babies are important. Move on. But when you see a baby and the baby is suffering, you're going to feel bad about it. And you should feel bad about it because that is humanity's instinct trying to preserve and prosper the species. So you look at this baby with the whooping cough and you feel sad, and it's one of the most virtuous feelings of sadness you can feel. Then you think, okay, what can I constructively do about it? But so apparently babies can get their first Tdap vaccine at 2 months old, but NBC reports that among the 30 states that presented recent statistics, 70% of jurisdictions were below the recommended levels of protections. It gives credence to the practice of having visitors to the homes of young babies wear masks. We did that for a little bit. I don't think we did it too strictly, but for the first 2-3 months or so, we didn't go crazy about it, but it was something we thought about. The child is I just wrote, you think that the kid is going to not see the face of the people, and it is important that they see faces, it's true, but a kid that young is asleep a lot of the time anyway, so they aren't quite as aware of the world as they will be, so you might think that you're messing up the emotions. If you think about how much the kid sleeps, you're probably not doing it that much.
Isn't their vision of very young children not even fully developed that were amorphous blobs
Absolutely.
for a while?
Absolutely.
It's not,
Yeah.
There's no definition. It takes a little while for object permanence. So
That's right. Yes.
The
Yes,
amorphous
the
blob,
visions-
yeah. What difference does it make if the amorphous blob has a mask or no mask until the vision improves?
The vision starts out very blurry. They don't even really see that far from their own face. And then even when it improves, at first there isn't a distinguishing between objects. It's just it would be like a surrealist painting with colorful blobs in the place, and where does one blob end and where does the other one begin? I'll have to look up exactly when the objects start to be distinguished between, but there's a great overlap there in the early days. So protect your young babies, they're vulnerable. The first question that comes to my mind is, are we now officially living in a low-trust society where we can't trust our neighbors to protect our children from communicable diseases that pretty much have been cured, in effect, on a society-wide basis by being vaccinated or by other means? Is this just a problem of certain states, or is it nationwide? What do you think?
When haven't we lived in a low-trust society? There's always been exemptions to these laws and rules that exist for vaccinations, mainly religious exemptions that exist. So, yes, the groups that participated in these kinds of practices self-segregated out of society, of private schools and private communities and stuff. It's just the proliferation of information that has allowed for these sort of conspiracy theories, deep skepticism to develop, because the standards for presenting credible, evidenced information have in fact declined. That there was a time where there were only a few channels that presented the news, and they had to follow very specific standards in terms of the veracity and validity of the information they shared with the public. And now we have just such a huge proliferation, this balkanized media landscape, that people self-silo into their echo chambers, and they just hear the same things over and over again, and keep reinforcing. This is how you get RFK Jr. and his weird vaccine skepticism movement where they just keep like reinforcing very cherry picked, very narrow bands of information and apply that as the whole, right? So maybe one or two people were harmed by a vaccine once, and suddenly that means that everybody gets harmed by a vaccine or everybody faces the risk. And it's no, that's not how any of this works. That no process is perfect. There's always exceptions to the rule, but that doesn't mean you throw out the whole enterprise. The whole point of vaccination, I think part of it is that people, there's like a collective forgetting of just how
Yeah.
bad it really was. Because there was a time where young people, at least some percentage of the population, didn't live past the age of 10. They got really sick. They got the
Yeah.
plague, or they got polio, or they got some other extreme disease, boom, dead, right? And part of this is actually a consequence of being complacent, right? That we've become so familiar and reliable, or so reliant on these systems that are meant to protect us that we forget that there was a time where the systems didn't protect us, that it was a very chaotic, very disease riddled world.
And that time overlapped also with the existence of this country. How many of the kids died in the first part of their life and childhood? Yeah. Speaking about, we are in a low trust society, and adjoining that comment was like, is this just a problem in certain states or is it nationwide?
Oh, it's nationwide, right? That these issues occur. If you look at the data in every county of the U.S., there's some percentage of the population that is resisting getting vaccinations to some degree. You see this with parents taking their kids out of the public school system and going to private schools because in public schools you have mandatory vaccinations, and so there's definitely a trend that's been moving in a direction away from fully vaccinating. You wouldn't see these cases of measles or not in what we're talking about, whooping cough, if there was enough for herd immunity of kids getting vaccinated for the Tdap and the other one, the mumps, rubella, and measles. I think is what it is. That
Mhm.
vaccine. You wouldn't see the cases that we see, the resurgence of these diseases, if there was the vaccination regime to the degree that other countries have that don't face the same issue. Part of it, I think, really is this sort of fiercely independent, ideologically driven movements in the United States that aren't always rooted or grounded in reason, that it's like a moral panic. So if you look at the history of the US, there's these like windows of time where just society erupts into like bizarre rabbit holes. So the one I'm thinking of is the satanic rituals at child daycare centers, that there was a
Hmm.
time in the U.S., or think of even the witch trials, calling people witches and saying that they were witches. Their trials were dumb, and irrational. But that one's not unique to the U.S. There was the Inquisition and all sorts of like religious purges throughout European history. But the vaccination hesitancy and anti-vax movement definitely is of, at least it's more prominent and loud in the U.S. As far as I can tell. It's not as prominent in other parts of the world. What are the other countries saying that we're not in terms of reducing the incidence of vaccine preventable diseases? Like, why are we so unique in the world of having just a portion of the population that is so resistant to something that a technology that frankly has saved millions of lives?
It reminds me of John Kerry at some point explaining to a foreign audience and saying, in the United States, you have the right to be wrong. He's talking about a social thing, I think. I don't think he's talking, but it would be covered. It would be covered by freedom of speech, but it becomes a social thing where it's, here's your take on it and here's my take on it. My take on it is that it's a flat earth. What about this? What about that? It's just my opinion, and they do have answers.
Yeah,
To
you're
these
referring
things.
to a speech he gave in 2013 where he said, "In America, you have a right to be stupid."
Oh, okay. Stupid, sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that verbatim. That's my understanding is that's what he said. Is that in the U.S. people have a right to be stupid and we tolerate stupidity. The big issue, at least in that respect, is that social media amplifies stupidity. So there was a
Right.
time that like
Amplifies anger, too.
yeah,
Mhm.
there was a time that ignorance, foolishness, and being a moron, these were all like contained in their own little siloed communities. But the issue right now is that because of the ubiquity of the internet, the fact that it's readily available for so many people, at a pretty affordable cost. People have a megaphone that they otherwise may not have had in the past to really amplify their message. That's how you get Alex Jones talking about crazy conspiracy theories and then getting sued for it, and all these other things where some people figured out that you can make an awful lot of money telling low information people just outright, maybe not lies, but exaggerations, omissions, misleading statements and things, and make money doing it, right? By fanning the flames of paranoia and distrust. There's money in it.
Because it occurs to me that not everybody gets, because some people are immunocompromised, so some people don't end up getting the vaccines, and everybody else gets them in theory, in order to protect those people. And among such people, immunocompromised isn't the word for it, but the people who can't get vaccines are babies, because that's not in the schedule yet. I just think to myself, this is a bit of I had a bit of an aha moment, like 1 to 2 years ago, when I realized that baked into the value of a lot of homes is the fact that the schools are good in that area. So, how much, I'm going to get this wrong because I'm doing it on the fly, but how much would education for a teenager, like at a private school, cost per year? Probably $10,000 or more dollars.
I'll actually give you an example. So there was a
Yeah.
time where there was a very real possibility I was going to go move to Italy for a few years in high school to go to private school in Rome. And the tuition we were looking at was $26,000 a year for
Right.
every year. This was in 2000, I don't know, 5, 6. So
Yeah.
use that as a guide. It's probably more. But in terms of private schools, the tuition isn't cheap. It's steep. It's very expensive for going to a good private school. It's not cheap. And remember, what's so egregious, I think, for the private school movement in the United States is that all these families are also paying property taxes into the public school system. So they're paying for
Yeah.
private school in addition to already paying for public schools. So that's really bizarre that essentially they want their kids segregated from something that they're already paying for. I guess I understand it, but at the same time, I don't. Okay, so I understand it for religious instruction that if they want their children to have prayer in school, that you're not going to have mandatory prayer in a public school where everybody's required to pray at a certain time or attend mass or be instructed on the Bible or something like that. That I understand, that if they want their kids to have religious education. But the whole issue is that it creates this sort of, how do I explain this? It creates a distance between people, right? That if you don't have everybody attending the same schools, that you create this sort of chasm of understanding between those who attend private schools and everybody else. That's how you get someone like Trump who says, "Oh, there's no affordability crisis," because he hasn't seen. I went to a private school. I've seen people who couldn't afford food, that they'd rifle through the garbage for food. That happened in college too, actually, as I met people who were students, but they didn't have access to enough money on hand to pay for just food. So they'd fish out food that other people had eaten from the garbage and eat that. Like, I encountered that. And obviously there's a lot of visible homelessness in Seattle's U district. But what was I saying? Oh, that's the thing. You're not going to find a lot of homeless kids in a private school. But in public schools, one, every child in the US is required to attend public school or school in general. So you will encounter individuals who are in fact homeless in public schools if you attend a public school in the United States, which means that you get a much more direct interaction and understanding, a more developed empathy of the struggles that people face on a day-to-day basis. I know I did, but that's because the school we went to was big. There were a lot of people there. So you saw all strata of the socioeconomic spectrum.
That was one of my favorite things about it, is the fact that it seemed like people from all walks of society were there, and you could talk to them on a daily basis, and it was very good. I wish we had I wish we had robust public squares where we still had that, as opposed to having everybody siloed in their homes scrolling on TikTok.
So it actually, public schools actually are the closest thing we have to
Yeah, they are.
public square. In fact, in a lot of the cities and towns in the U.S., public schools are the emergency shelters. If there's a tornado,
Right.
there's an earthquake, there's a hurricane, people go to the public schools because they're the meeting place, or a city hall. But usually it's a public school, like a gym or.
But in terms of, because educating a kid in with quality is not a cheap expense, nor is it prohibitive. If it's $30,000 per year, that can be prohibitive. But like in Washington, I don't exactly know the cost per pupil. I think it's like $15,000 per pupil per year or so, and it varies place by place. Expensive, but not like the moon landing. I thought, okay, certain schools have a better reputation than others, so if you take the cost of educating a kid at a certain rate, and you're entitled to that based on where you live, then it would justify paying a greater amount for the residents, because generally that amount is retained anyway. Generally the value of the property rises as opposed to diminishing. And so if you just consider it from an interest, okay, this is how much more interest I have to pay on my mortgage, but I would have to pay that much if I wanted to get the tuition for this school anyway, it comes out to justifying an increase in the household of somewhere in the neighborhood of hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I thought, okay, now I'm starting to get it a little bit, I think. And then I thought, what if there was a neighborhood where I thought that there weren't as many communicable diseases? And I just hate thinking in these terms, of course, because as you say, it's like the stratification of society. But proximity is extremely important when we're talking about infectious diseases. And if all will not protect, it doesn't even have to be like the rich do it. Maybe it could just be communities anywhere. No, I'm not going to associate it with the homeowners association. It's like community covenant. We're going to protect each other. I hate to go down this road, but especially for the immunocompromised, maybe vaccine neighborhoods. Am I barking up the wrong tree for that one?
No, look, there is a trend that counties with higher levels of income have a higher vaccination rate. Is there something that people who have more money know about vaccines that others don't? I don't think so. I think it correlates in some respects with education and with where the wealthiest neighborhoods in the US are in terms of their politics. But the whole point here is that it's really disappointing if where we're headed as a country is that people are going to self-segregate between the vaccinated communities and not. That we're because ideally, it just like for universal healthcare, things like a right to housing, we would want, because it's the general welfare, we would want everybody to have access equally to these vaccinations, to the access to medical treatment, access to affordable housing. And the fact that it's these poorer communities that seem to be more susceptible to this misinformation and these anti-vax movements is a real disappointment. It's a failure of our education system in some respects, of creating more equal outcomes in terms of the people arriving at the conclusion that vaccinations are the safer route to take in the long run for the greater good. There are exceptions. Wealth is no guarantee of somebody not having their children not get vaccinated. That there are religious, if you look at the measles outbreak in Texas, it was religious communes, right? And some of these communes aren't necessarily poor. That there are some religions that are quite wealthy, that they pool their wealth and resources to help each other. It's just that there's ideological reasons for why they don't want to vaccinate, and that there's like a deep skepticism of government.
Yeah, I guess I shouldn't have started by putting it in terms of property values. I just had the thought experiment of, oh, that's why the houses cost more over there, as a precursor in my own mind. But I could put it as, like, maybe neighborhoods have, or cities have discussions of, okay, here's the values we have, protecting the endangered.
Look, a parallel would be crime. when people choose a neighborhood to live in, one of the things they look at is crime statistics. They see if the neighborhood they're living in has a high rate of murders or thefts. The same kind of argument could be made for areas that have low vaccination rates because the
Mm-hmm.
outcomes are similar.
There you go.
If kids are getting
Mhm.
sick and dying, I would argue that like rational people looking to survive and thrive in a society would avoid areas that have greater degrees of sickness and death, like the plague. So
Mhm.
the parallel I think of is leprosy, that there used to be leper
Yeah.
colonies and that lepers would be sent to islands and stuff, is that we may reach a point where you're going to have people that are disfigured and sick again from vaccine preventable diseases that are contagious. People will notice that and be like, nope, and peace out to somewhere else. That it'll become something like that if the information becomes readily available of where these outbreaks are happening, these infectious disease outbreaks. The thing I think about is polio, right? Polio leads to lifelong
Mm.
complications and
Yeah.
issues that people have to deal with. The worst examples I can think of are iron lung machines, where people with
Yeah.
extreme polio have to quite literally live in a machine to the end of their days,
Mhm.
having their lungs manually pumped, right?
Yeah.
That's the extreme. And if a vaccine can prevent that, I don't know, man. Like even a life with if the fear is autism, autistic people can survive and exist in society. It's quite
Yeah.
more difficult to exist in a iron lung machine, right? Where you
Yes.
need 100% around the clock care, right? If the power goes out, dead. If the it's just people would need extreme assisted living. That's one thing I don't quite understand about this anti-vax movement is that the thing they're fearing doesn't seem as bad as the thing that the vaccines are trying to prevent, right? So some of these diseases are deadly, they're fatal, right? That you get them and then you get sick and die. The thing that they're worried about, something like autism, that can be treated. That can be people can navigate life with autism. They can live with it. And so it's
Mhm.
just one of those things where it doesn't quite, I don't know, the priorities seem all over the place. But also the risks they're talking about, even if those risks exist, are substantially lower than the other risks that people take in life. Do they not drive cars? Do they not walk on sidewalks? Do they not go outside and breathe the air full of the toxins from car exhaust and bus exhaust and all the
Mhm.
other stuff that people breathe in? Are they living in bubbles? Because that's what I'm trying to understand about this situation, that there's this extreme aversion to vaccinations and medicine, but you don't see an extreme aversion to other things like interacting with other people, owning guns or something, or driving a car, or flying on a plane, or going on a bus, or swimming, right? There's all these
Yeah.
risks that people take that have a possibility of bad stuff happening, and they take them anyways. But for this one,
Mhm.
no, I guess it's just it has to be like an absolute. You have to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. That you either have a perfect situation of nobody facing any complications, or you just don't get it. That's what I don't
Mhm.
understand. Do people? Because here's the thing: do they drink water? Do they eat food? Those
Yeah.
systems
Right.
can fail. Water treatment can fail. Food we've seen can have failure. There can be listeria outbreaks. There can be E. coli. There can be any number of issues that happen with food. You can get food poisoning from eating food. People still eat food because they have to. I
Yeah.
don't understand why in our modern society that getting vaccinations isn't viewed in the same manner. That it's a necessity to prevent a bad outcome. You eat
Mhm.
food so you don't starve to death. You drink water so you don't dehydrate to death. You get a vaccination so you don't get sick from something that can kill you. Can kill
Simple as
you,
that.
that is contagious and can lead to fatality or to extreme suffering and pain. That's simple. The trade off, the consequences, not as bad, period. But I guess there has to be like this absolute standard for this one. It either has to be the best or nothing. And nothing sucks. We know that because people get sick and they die. That just happened in Texas with the measles outbreak. Is the alternative of getting no vaccination? There's no real way to effectively prevent the spread of these diseases if they're out and about in the community other than extreme isolation. Maybe that's what the anti-vaxxers would do, but they don't. They still interact. We saw this during COVID, right? When people were asked to wear masks and to social distance, and some segment of the population was like, nah, not going to do that. And they showed up to political
Yeah.
rallies and they go to big parties and they'd go sing in choirs and all these other things. And then a bunch of them would get sick and a bunch of them would die. And they were
Mhm.
warned explicitly, don't do this. Do not
Yeah.
get within certain distance of each other, wash your hands, wear masks. And everyone's, nah, I don't want to do it. It's my freedom to be stupid.
Yeah, according to John Kerry, I'll see you. I'll see you at the holiday super spreader instead of the holiday party.
Instead of the holiday party.
People would crack, that's the thing. People would crack jokes about it on social media. They'd be like, haha, I'm going to go to this party. And then they'd get COVID, they'd get in the hospital, and they'd die. So that's the seriousness of this thing. If you just are constantly skeptical of everything that is presented to you as advice or instruction by the government, that there has to be some level of, I don't know, social trust or the glue that binds society. A society ultimately is a tool designed to help people survive better from the dangers of the environment. Man versus environment,
Yes.
man versus animal, man versus man. Society is ultimately man versus the environment, right? There are certain things we know of the environment that can cause us great harm. Predators, diseases, natural disasters. And society is the fabric that's meant to keep us from facing the worst of those things and to rebuild if we encounter them in our lives, a fire, an earthquake, a hurricane, a tornado. If we live in this like extreme libertarian, independent kind of thing, that presents a risk to everybody. That's the issue I had with what Elon Musk did when he fired so many people through Doge. Is it's like you're firing people who are hired by the government to prevent the worst things from happening. You don't fire the world expert in studying bug diseases on trees if they're the only one stopping a massive invasion of bugs destroying trees, right? We need the trees, or we need the vegetables, or we need whatever it is, these esoteric, like not strange, these unique jobs that filled a very particular niche that only exist through government. There's no private demand for solving like a bug crisis on national park trees, but the value may not be immediately realized, but it's there for what they're doing, making sure that because there's environmental implications if the trees all die due to what the trees do for reducing CO2 in the atmosphere, right? It's all interconnected, right? And if you inculcate this sort of degree of skepticism of everything, that's how you get someone like Trump elected, of just constantly naysaying, oh, everything's bad, everything's wrong, I alone can fix everything. It's like we're seeing that play out right now. That's not happening, right? The prices aren't down. There's some weird statements being thrown about of, oh, the prices are lower than they've ever been, and everything's affordable, and life is great. The golden age of America. No, we're not. Absolutely not. We're not in the golden age of America. Also, as long as there are thousands, if not tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if not millions of homeless people in the United States, there's always going to be an affordability crisis. I don't care what they say about, oh, everything's great and dandy and the price is lower. No, if there's a segment of the population that cannot afford to live in shelter reliably on a consistent basis, there's always some degree of an affordability crisis in the United States because it's an abject failure of everybody, of society, of the government, of our economic system, that whatever tools we have available to us to make an income or to afford the basic necessities of life aren't enough. Period. I don't know how else to say it. If there's 1% of the population that cannot live anywhere in the country, and that because of the Supreme Court can now be thrown in jail due to it or fined, they literally cannot live on parks, sidewalks, benches, on national land. There's just nowhere they can live because the Supreme Court said that they can be fined. That's a profound failure of society.
Yeah.
There is an affordability crisis.
You're guilty. Your crime, poverty. Oh boy.
Oh boy.
Yeah, no, if you want to see that taken to an extreme, you were talking about Alcatraz. I just watched yesterday the movie Murder in the First about Henry Ford. It was a guy who sued Alcatraz because they threw him in solitary confinement for 3 years because he tried to escape. His crime for getting thrown into Alcatraz, stealing $5. $5. And he got thrown into a dark hole 24 hours a day, living in total darkness, naked, for 3 years. Beaten, hurt. He got 30 minutes of exercise once a year. Extreme.
That's not enough exercise. No way.
Oh, extreme living conditions. Is that really where we're headed as a society? That we're headed back to debtors' prisons, people getting extreme penalties for stealing $5 or a loaf of bread? Are we headed to Les Miserables? Are people going to become John Valjean 20 years for a loaf of bread? breaking a window pane.
Yeah, did you know that in 1700s in England, prisoners of debtors' prisons had to pay for their stay in prison?
Can you imagine?
They have to pay now in the United States. If they're thrown in jail or prison, they have to pay a daily fee. We talked about Unifor, where it's 100% pays for itself. People work to pay for their prison stay, as in they're paid like a nominal amount, a dollar or whatever an hour, or 50 cents an hour, and the rest of what they earn goes to pay for their prison incarceration and restitution. So that's how that works right now in the United States with our form of legalized slavery. It's in the Constitution that people can be enslaved as a penalty for a crime. They are.
Yikes. So, from, vaccines and whooping cough to debtor's prison. Oh boy, the dismal situation continues. Mondays with Mike.